Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Bio Cup Bionicle Inspiration Series BIS coverage, whatever you want to call it. This is the thing that you love. This will be the second last episode of the Bio Cup coverage. As the competition winds to a close, so will my coverage. I will actually have another podcast coming out where we will be talking with one of the Bio Cup judges. However, there was a slight technical difficulty when recording that. The audio went fine. The podcast was actually one of the best I'd ever done, in my opinion. I thought it was great. But when I tried to edit it on Audacity, I did some 30 minutes of work, did about 30 minutes of the audio, took a break, came back, and then Audacity's like, oh yeah, sorry man, I lost it said 530 instances of sound loss. So I didn't even know that was possible to lose that much. But I have the basic frame of the podcast. I just kind of have to go back over and sort of re-record some of my lines. However, with the little bit that I've edited now, with that sudden drastic change, you can't really tell the difference. So that's exciting. But it makes the workload a little bit more intense on that. So you will get it, but a little later than I planned. So a little bit of a shame there, but you have a few more podcasts that are BioCup themed to look forward to. Anyway, that's about it. Next episode, we'll be looking at the 3 entries that were entered into the final round of the Bio Cup. But before we get into that, let's talk about this current episode, where we'll be talking about the other few mocks that were entered into the final semi-final round of the Bio Cup. Quick side note, I will not be talking about Sergei Rachmaninoff's mock Machine Cavalry, because we talked about that in the podcast, but I will be talking about the other entries that were featured in that contest. So, enough rambling, let's begin. The first mock that we are going to be talking about today is by Poor Disadvantage, and is called Attack on Plague Mech. Obviously a fun nod to Attack on Titan. So we kind of got 2 awesome things in this mock. We've got a Plague Mech awesome looking guy, and then we've got this awesome system diorama that goes with it. So I'll talk quickly about the Plague Mech, and then we'll go on to the diorama. Some really cool stuff on here. He's managed to really nicely blend a really cool color scheme of dark red and white in with some of these awesome Cricker pieces. Of course, Cricker was one of these sets from Mystica, the Mystica wave of Bionicle, and he had some really interesting parts that kind of had this sort of odd kind of trans white and red kind of mix between the 2 parts there. They're really difficult pieces to use, in my opinion, because their colors are very unlike anything else that's Lego. So you kind of have to, buy 1 or 2 of that set and really use all of those parts in a mock if you ever want to use those parts in a mock. However, this mock has actually really nicely blended dark red and white with those, and it kind of makes everything look like it was meant to kind of go together. It's really cool. Kind of given the nature of this being, Plague Mech being sort of bug-like and kind of a bit more animalistic in some nature, sort of having these additional highlights here with these Cricker parts just kind of look like sort of more scaly, as Mitch Henry would call it, crunchy aspects of the bug, and I think it's pretty cool actually. It's a nice little addition there, aspects like these sort of pincers on the mouth and then the sort of more spiky areas on the arms. It works really well as a kind of highlight or accent point on the mock, and I think that's really, really cool. Something else that's really cool and kind of continues this sort of bug aesthetic here, this sort of creepy, crawly, gross kind of look that he's got, is how he's layered all of these Rakshi spine pieces here on the back. It looks a bit kind of like some kind of exoskeleton, like a bug shell of some kind. I think it's just really nice playing with parts there. He's kind of managed to really use a lot of the textures on those pieces and effectively achieve that bug look. I think it's actually quite impressive, so very, very nicely done. Also really cool, just the overall shape of this. It's taken a lot of nods from various bugs and things like that, but put it in a more sort of humanoid form, which is really unique and really awesome. Always cool to see multiple armed mocks. Not something you see every day. It's always really cool. My favorite thing on this mock, though, has definitely got to be these crazy eyes. Really interesting design, implementing all these dishes coming out in various directions here, giving him this really awesome, crazy, creepy look. And man, you don't see that every day on mocks. Most people kind of stick with, 1 or 2 eyes on a mock. Man, this mock's got heaps of them on there. So it's really interesting to see people playing around with that. I think that's really unique and really, really cool. Speaking of really unique and really, really cool, I love what Mr. Poor Disadvantage has done here with the system and Bionicle hybrid diorama on this mock. He's used some pieces from various Bionicle playsets, like this big old mask here. For those of you who don't remember these Bionicle playsets, there were a few of them that came with some very large system Bionicle mask pieces. And I know that's always been a dare amongst various Bionicle builders to, make a mock that uses that as a mask, because obviously those things are huge. Can you do it? So, hey, that's something to give a go if you're looking for a challenge there. But really cool to see this being used in a sort of Bionicle temple system thing like that, how it was essentially originally used. It's nice to see. Something else that's really cool as well is on the base here, there's a sort of weird textured part down here, and then you take a look at the top of the tower here, and you've got another sort of weird looking part. Now these were actually, well, the top part here was the lid on, I would say it's a Knight's Kingdom set. However, it's a lid of an old canister from a Lego set. And then this other weird textured piece here is, again, from Bionicle playsets, like this one. So really cool to see some very obscure parts being used there, and who would have thought to use canister lids in mocks? Bionicle, most of those sets came with canisters, not so much some of the newer ones, but even some Hero Factory sets too had canisters, all sorts of stuff like that. And who would have thought that those would have worked so nicely, implementing them in with a whole bunch of other system parts, as well as Bionicle parts for that matter. So that's something to keep in mind in the future is, hey, maybe if you've got some old sealed Bionicle sets, or you've kept those canisters around, or you just want to pick some up, it's something that you could very easily implement into a mock somehow, because as we can see here, it works very, very nicely. So nicely done, Mr. Poor Disadvantage. Great to see you playing around with some really difficult to use parts, and some parts I never even thought of using for a mock. Very nicely done. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Grayson and is called Future Soldier and Drone Beast. Some very funky colors being used here. Always awesome to see mocks that use some really interesting color schemes. I had Jafer message me, and he simply said he would love to see an episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series on color scheme, because for him, seeing a really unique and awesome color scheme really inspires him when he's building a mock. And I'm definitely going to take him up on that advice. It's a great idea for an episode theme. So yeah, just seeing some mocks using some more obscure and unique colors, especially some of those Friends colors that we can see being used here on the, I believe that's magenta is the color name for that? Or is it, no, that's not lavender. I think it's magenta. I might be wrong. I'm not so good with the naming of my Friends colors, so maybe I have that wrong there, but definitely take a look at some Friends sets and have a look at those colors, and have a look at some of the sets that feature more heavily some of those parts too, because you take a look at some aspects of both of these mocks. Grayson has essentially just repeated a bunch of the exact same part, but in the same color. And using that repetition there, kind of creating some nice unity all over through the mock, is really effective. You're able to use a very nice color scheme, but you don't need thousands of that part in that specific color. You're able to just essentially have 2 or 3 pieces, but using them in larger quantities. I think that's really cool, and achieves a very nice, awesome looking result. Something else that's really awesome and unique is the head design on this Future Soldier guy, using the fin head there and then attaching a tire that's been turned inside out to kind of look like some sort of cool science fiction helmet of some kind. It's a really nice way of using some of the CCBS Star Wars Ultra Build heads, because man, those things are just difficult to use. And so finding a sort of more unique way like this to implement it inside a mock is just really, really awesome. Some other really cool things here, seeing the sort of basic CCBS frame here with some more custom elements like the torso and things like that, but just how Grayson has been able to kind of detail this and add some extra depth to a fairly simplistic but nicely built frame. You take a look at the torso, simply adding in that little sort of stud piece there onto the middle, just kind of a nice little detail addition there. Even sort of the knee pads here, kind of adding these handlebar pieces there, just as a nice little addition. It's only subtle, but the devil's in the details. It's always what makes a mock really, really awesome, is when you have a nice attention to detail. So yeah, I think that's something to consider, and something that's really awesome and nicely done from Grayson here. Also really cool to see a sort of robotic science fiction beast and a sort of future soldier there, using some wings and a cool looking head design, stuff like that, to make, yeah, like he said, a future soldier and a drone beast. It's a nice concept for the future, which of course is the theme for this round of the Bio Cup. An interesting, simple, but very effective take on the theme, so nicely done. Let's move on to the next mock, and this is by Rockmonster 2000 and is called Harbinger of the Hunt. Now, I think this mock is fantastic. It's actually quite small, but small doesn't necessarily mean that it is not able to hold itself with some of these other contestants that entered into this round, because there's some fantastic techniques going on here. First of all, a very simple but really nicely designed base here, using a lot of system parts here. The sort of bleak, simplistic, sort of sparse nature of the floor here kind of it not having too much on it, it actually looks quite futuristic, which is essentially like I said, the theme of this round. And so I think that's quite interesting there, just kind of playing with, I suppose playing with textures in terms of the fact that it's quite smooth, simplistic and sparse, almost sort of modern in that regard. And as a result, it lends itself to looking quite futuristic, which I think is really cool, because it's, not using too many pieces, but it still achieves that look in a very effective way. So I think that alone is very nicely done. And it's also really cool to see, just looking at all the individual limbs on this mock, everything is quite thinly designed, and it's really awesome. He's utilized a lot of these different mixel joints and various clips and things like that. And, you're able to use pieces in a more interesting way here if you are building slightly smaller. Using these pieces that came in black here that are used on the thighs, sometimes those might be too small on a sort of Toa-sized build or something. Whereas this, when you're building something a little bit smaller, you're able to use some of those more funky, interesting pieces to kind of cover a larger area on a specific part of the mock. And that's always really interesting. So cool overall to sort of see some more minimalistic designs in this regard. These lower legs here are simply just a couple mixel joints and one of these sort of curved slope pieces there. But it achieves the desired look. It kind of continues this sort of sparse, simplistic design that kind of communicates a sort of future aesthetic. And I think it's really surprisingly very effective. And then you kind of have a nice contrast there in terms of textures and everything with the head design here, in my opinion. You've got these sort of sharper looking claws and horn pieces coming out there, which looks sort of alien to the sort of cleaner design below, but we do see other aspects of that throughout the mock as well. But you've kind of got an interesting contrast there where things sort of overall seem very smooth and peaceful and nice, relaxing almost, but then you get these sharper textures and shapes coming in here. Things seem a little more almost dystopian, where things are, the future seems too good to be true, and there's some sort of deep, dark secret lurking beneath. So I think we've talked about it before, but this mock uses some textures and shaping and contrast as well in some really unique ways to be able to achieve a really interesting and unique result that really effectively communicates a sort of dystopian, scary, interesting future here. That said, though, he was actually building an anachronistic future, and he said that he's sort of combining a sort of past and present in this mock, which of course I think kind of relates a little bit to what I was talking about with those contrasting elements and things like that. You see sort of more sleeker designs to symbolize the future, and sort of rougher, edgier designs sort of symbolizing the past, aspects like that. I think that's really, really cool. A couple other final details I think are really cool is playing with this ray cape here to make sort of robes on this mock. Looks really, really awesome. That actual cloth piece there actually has a lot of uses to it. I think it's definitely something that's fun to play around with, and you can get some really interesting results out of it like we see here. And then another cool thing is the weapon on this mock, as well as the little sort of what appears to kind of be some sort of like ammo pouch or something on the side of the leg there. Just sort of repeating these bucket handle pieces here. It's just an interesting looking texture and an interesting looking little addition on the side there. I don't necessarily know what it is. I'm guessing that it's some sort of ammo pack or some pouch or something like that. But it's just visually interesting. Sometimes adding in little details like that on a mock that, logically or story-wise, they aren't actually anything. You've just kind of put it there, but it's only just because it looks nice. I don't know, those sorts of details are always welcome on a mock, in my opinion, and it's always something to think about. Everything doesn't necessarily need to have a purpose on a mock. Of course, it often helps to make sure it does have a purpose, but just simply adding something on there because it aesthetically looks nice is always something you can do. And I think on this area here on the mock, it's very much a welcome and fantastic addition. So I really like that. Anyway, that's it for those 3 mocks on the semi-finals of the Bio Cup. Stay tuned for the next episode where we will cover, like I said, the 3 entries into the final round of the Bio Cup. And of course, stay tuned for that podcast that I mentioned, and probably a couple others where I may talk to some of the other judges and have a little bit of a discussion about some of our favorite entries into the competition. Just a quick additional update here. You may be like, but Ben, you said you do heaps of podcasts during the Bio Cup. I did indeed say that. I apologize that was not the case. The main reason for that was I was having a few internet troubles, and so recording podcasts with people was almost impossible. I attempted to do it, however, every 5 seconds it just kept cutting out, and it just wasn't fair on my guest to waste their time like that. So I've been doing my best to fix these internet problems. But, I've had a little bit of trouble there. They seem to be all fixed now, though it's starting to act up again, so I don't know what's up with that. That said, you can expect more podcasts, but I'm going to have to figure out these internet problems first. Anyway, that's about it. I'll see you in the next episode of the BioCup coverage and the regular Bionicle Inspiration series episodes, which are on every Saturday. See you soon. Happy building. Bye for now, guys.